So you've just learned two very important lessons about companioning the dying. The first of which is to recognize that you have needs. And the second is to take your own seat. Yeah? My name is Frank Ostaseski, and I had the good fortune of starting a program called the Zen Hospice Project in the early 80s. It was a kind of fusion of spiritual insight and practical social action. We cared initially mostly for people who were living on the streets of San Francisco. I changed many a diaper on park benches behind City Hall. And over the years, over some 20 years while I was there, we had the good fortune of caring for thousands of patients and training thousands of volunteers, actually. I probably sat bedside with, well, maybe 1,000 people. And one of the things that I saw in that was that being with dying, maybe like good poetry, can point us to the essence of things. And dying, particularly dying from protracted illness, is a kind of stripping away process. We are stripped away often of our physical capacities. Sometimes as a result of medications or a disease process, our mental capacities are diminished. We often withdraw from certain social groups or can't participate in them anymore. But there's something more fundamental than that, really. And that is all the ways we have defined ourselves. I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a lover. Those also go. I was invited on the Oprah show a few years back. Caring for dying people is much easier than being on Oprah. This was right after the events of 9/11, and Oprah was trying to do a series of shows to help calm the fear that was in America. And so she invited me on in the hopes that we could talk about the dying process and how it goes for people and how we might learn something from that experience that would help us in our fear. And I said to Oprah, we have to sit down and have a cup of tea with death, get to know it really well. And she said, well, why would we want to do that? And I said, oh, Oprah, I said, all the ways we've defined ourselves. I'm a Buddhist teacher, you're a talk show host, you've got those nice boots on. All of those are going to go. And then who are we? Then who are we? This stripping away that I'm speaking of, it reveals something that we may have glimpsed at some point in our life, but now we have a certain access to it, a very easy access to it, actually. And it becomes a kind of guide in the process of dying. In a similar way, dying and spiritual practice or meditation practice have an awful lot in common. There's this withdrawal from the world. There's a kind of turning inward, a deep sense of humility, practice of silence. And there's this profound inquiry that begins into the nature of oneself. And often there's symbolic language that's used as an attempt to sort of point us at something beyond what we normally experience. The transcendent, the divine, the boundless. As part of Zen Hospice Project, we had a palliative care program at Laguna Honda Hospital. Some of you are familiar with it here. It's the nation's largest long-term care facility. 1,100 beds. 1,100 beds. And in the old hospital, now it's been rebuilt, in the old hospital, when we first began, there were wards of 30 or 40 people to a ward. And when we were first invited to establish a hospice there, I thought, oh no, we should close this place down. But then as I walked the wards, I said, oh no, if the Buddha were here, where would he go? He'd come here. And so we created the hospice unit just like the other wards, because we didn't want it to be different. And so imagine this room of 30 or 40 people, bed after bed after bed after bed, all living and dying together. What we thought would be our worst nightmare turned out to be our dream, actually. People finding companionship in each other in their dying process. People watching others die, unafraid. I was walking down this gauntlet of beds one day to a meeting, and I saw an older African-American man just breathing with great difficulty, and I stopped on my way to the meeting. I pulled my chair up next to his bed, and I sat beside him, and I said, "You look like you're working really hard." And he was, he was breathing with great difficulty. He was perspiring. He was actively dying. And so I said, "You look like you're working really hard," and he said, "Yeah, just got to get there," and he points like that. And I said, "Oh." I said, "If I promise to come, can I go with you?" And he said, "Yeah," and he grabbed my hand. And I said to him, I didn't bring my glasses today. I can't see there into the distance. Can you see? And he said, "Yeah," and he described for me a sloping hillside to a kind of plateau. I said, "You want to go?" "Yeah." "Okay, let's go." And we walked up this hill to this plateau. And it was hard work. He was sweating bullets. He was breathing with great difficulty. We got to this plateau, and I said, "Can you see there further into the distance?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I can't see it. Describe it to me." And he described for me a little one-room red schoolhouse with 3 steps and a door. This was a man who'd been raised in rural Mississippi. I said, "You want to go?" "Yeah." Now, I could have told him at this point, "You're disoriented times 3. This is a result of the morphine and the brain metastasis. You're here at Laguna, the hospital. Let me orient you to time and space." But that wasn't really what was true. What was true is that we were going to a little red schoolhouse. I said, "There's the door. You want to go in?" "Yeah." I said, "Can I go?" I always ask permission, He said, "No." I said, "Okay, then you go. Go ahead." And a few minutes later, he died very peacefully. Yeah. I think dying is a sacred process. I think it's a time and a place of transformation. And I think the sacred has nothing to do with religion. And it's not about spectacular states of mind, or tunnels of light, or bardos, or any of these things. To recognize the sacred, it's not so much about seeing something new as it is about seeing things in a new way. The sacred's not separate or different than other things, but rather hidden in all things. And dying is a process of uncovering. It's a process of revealing, in a way, the truth that was always there. Dying is not simply a medical event, and we have to stop treating it as if it were. It's not just about making the best of a bad situation. That's a view that is held in our culture and often in our healthcare system. Dying is more about relationships than anything else. It's our relationship with those we love, with ourselves, with the suffering, with the dying itself, with God or boundlessness, or however we might define the ultimate kindness that lives in our universe. And so being with the dying is about facilitating those relationships. And my friend Rachel Remen, who's a colleague on my faculty, she says, those relationships are characterized more by mystery than mastery. I agree with her, but I think of it a little bit differently. You see, when I'm dying, I want mastery. I want someone like Bruce who will be at my bedside, or Steve who can manage my pain and my symptoms. I want mastery. I want somebody who knows what they're doing. Yeah? But that won't be enough. I also need somebody with me who's comfortable in the territory of meaning, who can help me discover what the value and purpose of this life has been, of this suffering is. And so I need somebody comfortable in the territory of meaning as well. But then there's this juncture in the dying process where meaning falls away completely. And then we enter into an entirely different territory, a territory where we're all explorers. And that's the territory of mystery, the territory of unanswerable questions, where we help people to discover a truth, even if it's one we don't agree with. Yeah. In this territory of mystery, at least in my experience, it's often about staying in the room when the going gets tough. Yeah? It's about not even suggesting answers, but being willing to live with the questions. And so, in my work, at least over these last 30 years, I found that spiritual support is every bit as important as good pain management. But it's rarely given enough credence. It's rarely attended to in an equally important way. And as a result, too many people are dying in distress and fear. And I think we can do something about that. I wanted to introduce you to Sono. Sono, this photo was taken 2 hours after she entered our hospice. And I said to her, Sono, how do you think it's going to be here? And she said, it's going to be all right, because in this place I can die the way I need to die. Not the way the insurance company told me I should die, or the doctor, or the minister told me I should die, but how I need to die. And so we gave her an opportunity to reflect, to look at her life, to tell us the stories of her life, so she could express to us what its meaning and value was. We would sit, sometimes she and I, in the kitchen here, next to the water tank, and write together. One time I was sitting there reading a book of Japanese death poems. I don't know if you know about these, but there's a tradition amongst Japanese monks and nuns that you write a poem on the day of your death that tells the essential truth of your life. Now, if you don't die that day, it doesn't count. You have to write another one the next day. Things like, by Kozan, empty-handed I entered the world, barefoot I leave it. My coming, my going, two simple happenings that got entangled. Or, tightening my abdomen against the pain, the caw of the morning crow. So I was telling her about these poems, and she said, I want to write one of those. And I said, good. All right, let's write it. She said, what's the form? I said, oh, don't worry about the form. Just write it. She said, okay. And she sat there at the kitchen table. You're seeing her right there. She wrote a poem and then went upstairs. And later she called me upstairs and she said, Frank, I wrote my death poem, and I want you to learn it. And so I said, okay. And she recited her poem for me. I've never written it down. She didn't give it to me to write down. She only gave it to me to learn and then tell others, just as she told me. You want to hear it? Yeah? This is a woman, by the way, who lived on the streets of San Francisco for 6 months before she came to our hospice. She wasn't a Buddhist practitioner. She certainly wasn't a Zen nun. But this is her poem. She said, don't just stand there with your hair turning gray. Soon enough, the seas will sink your little island. So while there is still the illusion of time, set out for some other shore. No sense packing a bag. You won't be able to lift it into your boat. Give away all your collections. Take only new seeds and an old stick. Send out some prayers on the wind before you sail. Don't be afraid. Someone knows you're coming. An extra fish has been salted. An extra fish has been salted. What allowed such a poem to come forward? I think in part it was that we had no agenda for Sona. We simply gave her kind, compassionate, loving attention. We gave her time alone. We forget about that sometimes with dying. We're so busy trying to be with dying people, we forget that they need time alone. They need time to meet their experience. But when they need someone, we need to be with them compassionately, intimately, in an attuned way. And then they can die the way they need to die. Don't just stand there with your hair turning gray. Soon enough, the seas will sink your little island. So while there is still the illusion of time, set out from some other shore. No sense packing a bag. You won't be able to lift it into your boat. Give away all your collections. Take only new seeds and an old stick. Isn't that a beautiful line? You know how we farm and garden? A stick, a seed, a stick, a seed. This is a woman that understands that death is not a full stop. Take only new seeds and an old stick. Send out some prayers on the wind before you sail. Don't imagine you can do this all by yourself. Send out some prayers on the wind before you sail. Don't be afraid. Someone knows you're coming. An extra fish has been salted. We can move from this to this. That's her death poem pinned to her bed covers. She asked me to make sure she was cremated with it, so that it went with her. To be a companion to the dying, I have found that three things are helpful. The first of those is the willingness to be compassionately present for suffering. There is suffering. There's a labor to dying. And we need to be compassionately present for that suffering and for our own suffering as well. It's only through that that we were able to build an empathetic bridge to the other. And the second characteristic that I found useful over the years is a willingness to release ourselves and others from the limitations of roles. When I'm dying, I don't want a role next to me. Not a dinner role, not a social worker. I want a human being who will be with me in an honest and authentic way. And the third characteristic or quality that I think is important is kind of twofold, and it is that we need to have an abiding confidence in the process of dying itself, that it's conducive, it's supportive of awakening, of growth, of transformation. And we need to have a trust that we are not the separate self we've taken ourselves to be. So, thank you, Sona. Thanks to all of you. Thank you to Jane for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. And isn't it beautiful that science and spirituality, poetics and medicine can live under the same roof? Thanks very much.